made fun of his startup idea at our reunion. Now his company bought my workplace. Hello, Reddit guys. My name is Emma. I'm a 34-year-old woman who destroyed her own life by cheating on her husband. I never thought I could do something like that, and I never thought I would come here to write this story, but here I am. Life has a way of taking you down some roads you never thought you would go. That's what happened to me. I cheated on my husband. I did this thing I never thought I could do. I was married for 6 years to John. He was like a dream that came true and gave so much happiness. But somehow along the way, things changed. They literally took the wrong turn, and I lost everything I had. I will now get into the story. I hope I will find some consolation and support here because I am so tired from being judged all the time. I really need some support. I first met John in college. He was a quiet, unassuming dude who sat in the back of the lecture hall and took notes while everyone else faded into sleep. I was nothing like him. Popular, eager, sure I was meant for bigger things. I hardly paid attention to him then. Years later, we reconnected at our 10-year college reunion. John had filled out a little, seemed a little more confident, but still dredged up that boy-next-door energy, completely predictable. As he was telling me about his plans to start a tech startup, some kind of logistics optimization, I laughed. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was all so small. A pipe dream, really. Logistics? What, like delivering boxes? I smiled wryly, glass of wine in hand. He smiled politely. Something like that. But it is more about enhancing supply chains for businesses. Automation. Sounds exciting, John, I said, sarcasm dripping off my voice. In retrospect, perhaps that should have been the moment when I got out. Perhaps that should have been the moment I understood John was a much sharper guy than he let on. But I didn't. I was busy thinking of my fiancé at the time, a dashing, flashy executive who knew how to fill a room with light. He was the kind of man I wanted to build a life with, a kinetic person, one who had ambition to match mine. So the way we got in a relationship was not romantic at all, I would say, no matter how much I would like things to be that way. After that reunion, it happened. We connected again. I was at a business mixer when I saw him across the room. He was dressed in a sharp suit, no trace of the boyish awkwardness I remembered. He had a quiet, confident demeanor that made heads turn. I found it surprising to see him shaking hands with senior executives, people who typically wouldn't have time for startup guys. I pretended to be shocked and walked up to him. John? Wow, you cleaned up well. He smiled, easy and warm. I could say the same, Emma. How have you been? We caught up. I found out that his little startup had grown into something much bigger, and now it had a name. Can't disclose here for privacy reasons. It was a pioneer in automation technology for supply chains. Businesses beat a path to his door. He hadn't merely succeeded, he had flourished. And I won't pretend or lie, I felt a pull. What I didn't tell you is that I underestimated John. I always did. And then I wasn't thinking much of it after that business mixer where we reconnected. Charming, yes, but he wasn't my type. At the time, I still liked the ostentatious, fast-talking men, you know, the ones with the fancy cars and the names they dropped. John was different. Quiet confidence, keen wit, without the ego that tended to come with men of his status. I began reaching out to him. Small things at first. A friendly text. Just read this article about your company. Thought of you. An invitation. Let's grab coffee next week. I would like your opinion on something. I never even considered it flirting. Not at first. So it started slowly. Coffee here, a dinner there. I told myself I liked John, that I was meeting up with someone who finally understood me. The truth was, I was captivated by his power, his ambition, and the way he looked at me like I was the most interesting woman in the room. John was safe to me, maybe a little boring, but successful in a way I didn't expect. Comfortable. I was at a point in my life where everything was falling apart after my last relationship. I was lonely, feeling lost, and I suspect I liked the notion of someone who wouldn't let me down the way my ex had. John listened. That's what I remember most. He listened. I could complain about my frustrations at work, about my breakup, and he wouldn't jump in. He wouldn't repair or pass judgment. He just got it. It was not idle talk or flattery when he spoke. His words always had weight. In retrospect, I believe I confused his patience with weakness. Well, I need to tell you about our first date, which happened by mistake. So I was having one of those awful days at work when every meeting feels like a personal attack, and every email feels like a boulder resting on your chest. I messaged John on a lark. "Drinks tonight? These complaints come from, I want to complain about life." He responded right away, "Why not dinner instead? It will make you feel better than food." I recall arriving at the restaurant and being shocked by how nice it was. John didn't bring me to a hot restaurant where all the world knew the world. Instead, he picked a calm, private place where I could hear myself think. "Didn't think of you as a wine guy," I said as he ordered a bottle. He smiled. "I've learned a thing or two." The conversation ran super smoothly. John was intelligent, his wit understated but devastating. He spoke about his work at OptiChain, about the future of technology, about things I never imagined I'd care about. He made it sound interesting. When he dropped me off that night, I hoped he'd kiss me. When he did not, I was annoyed and intrigued. I wasn't accustomed to men being patient. John didn't pursue me the way other men had. He let me come to him, and I did. I made excuses to meet up with him, lunches, late-night calls. He made me feel like I was the only thing in his life he didn't strategize. The few times he kissed me, it was steady. Not explosion or chaos, steady. I told myself that was what I wanted too. Something stable, someone who wouldn't hurt me. When he asked fewer than a year later, part of me worried I was jumping the gun. But I ignored the doubt. John was loyal and kind and successful. He had built a thriving business. I decided that at last I had won. What I didn't understand was that John was playing a much longer game than I ever could have imagined. I thought I had chosen him. It turns out he had picked me, and he knew how the story would end. He proposed within a year. He told me he'd always respected my ambition, my power. It was flattering to be desired by a man with the world at his feet, and I soaked it up. But here's the problem with admiration. Once you've had a little, you can never have enough. So, yeah, I and John got married, and we were happy. He was the only person that understood me so well, and always supported and helped me. He was always there for me, and I was so happy that we were together. I would not ask more from life, or maybe I would. We both wanted a baby. With a baby, our family would be completed. I was wishing we could have a baby. We both wanted a baby girl. But even if it was a boy, there wouldn't be any problem. So everything was fine until it wasn't anymore. Things just happened, and we grew distant. We stopped discussing things with each other, and I cheated. But cheating should never be a choice. Someone should never cheat on their partner because no one deserves that kind of thing. You may ask, what made me cheat on my husband? I have asked myself that question 1,000 times. The truth isn't tidy or flattering. The truth is messy, uncomfortable, and difficult to acknowledge. But if I may be frank, I cheated out of boredom. I was restless. I wanted something else, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what else might be. John was a good man, better than I deserved. He was steady, kind, and ambitious. But as his company scaled up, so did our distance. I once admired his focus, his drive. I convinced myself that by marrying him, I'd be marrying a partner with a future, and for a time it truly seemed like I'd won. I wore the CEO's wife like a badge of honor, despite not fully understanding what he did or why it mattered. Soon those things were not any more important, and John started investing a lot of his time in his business and less at home or out with me. Things started to break up, and gradually, that admiration that I once had for him soured into resentment. John was always working, late nights, weekends, and business trips, and when he was home, his head wasn't. He'd sit at the dinner table, nodding into space as I told him about my day while his phone was pinging with messages. I felt invisible. I was a guest in my own marriage, and I felt terrible about it. When we first started dating, he was the greatest listener. That's what I liked more about him. He listened to everything I said to him, and he always supported and advised me. And look at us now, not even communicating. I initially battled against it. I mean the desire to try out something new, the destiny to be loved or seen or also listened to. I busied myself with charity events, lunches with friends, spin classes, and shopping. On the outside, I created a life that seemed perfect, but on the inside, I was just going through the motions. I was feeling so confused, and I was not happy. To everyone, we were the perfect couple, but at home, we were like strangers. I convinced myself that John was the issue. I blamed everything I was feeling on him. I was thinking, he's never here. He does not care what I do. He doesn't need me. But the reality is, I didn't know how to sit still in a marriage that wasn't always exciting. When life turned predictable, I didn't know how to choose him, day after day. I was bored, and I needed some adrenaline. I needed excitement, and I needed to be desired again. So I tried some ways to make things exciting again. I went out and bought sexy, hot lingerie to wear for my husband. But what sometimes drove him crazy would not work anymore. He didn't even care. His work had his whole attention. So someone else showed me attention. I held on to it. They listened to me. They regarded me as if I were fascinating, like I was enough. With them, I felt seen, desired, important. It was intoxicating. There was also a darker side, though, a side I didn't want to acknowledge even exists. I liked the danger, the excitement of sneaking around, the adrenaline, the clandestine text messages, the hotel rooms, the lies. It gave me control. In my marriage, I felt like a bystander, like I was an afterthought in John's success story. When I cheated, though, I was calling the shots. I held secrets. It was not about love or even lust. It was about taking back something I believed I had lost. Finally, I also cheated out of being selfish. Ultimately, it was my own selfishness. I cheated because I wanted it all, the safety John offered, the prestige of being married to a man like him, and the thrill of the illicit. I believed I could take the world without consequences, that John would be too busy to pay attention. But I was wrong. John had never been quite so blind as I believed him to be. And the funny thing is, while I was running around looking for pieces of me in other people, he was silently watching, waiting, and building his empire. It all came out, and it dawned on me that John had been the better person then. I was running after all the wrong things. He decided to build something real. And now I'm alone and wondering if it's worth the cost that came with the thrill. So yeah, I cheated on my husband with this guy called Chris. Chris was another face in the office the first time I noticed him. He was in another department, sales, I believe. Chris wasn't particularly good at his job, but where Chris lacked in ability, he made up for in confidence. He was that guy, the one who always seemed to be laughing slightly too loudly at meetings, and leaning a bit too close when he spoke to you, and getting away with things that the rest of us wouldn't dream of trying. We first met at a quarterly work conference. I was there because I'd been convinced to lead a presentation for the marketing team that I hadn't exactly been looking forward to. I recall presenting to a room full of indifferent faces, nervous sweat trickling down my back as I fumbled through my slides. The moment I sat down, Chris leaned over a few seats down and said, "Don't worry, you were great. Better than 50% of the boring shit I've seen today." I looked at him, a little embarrassed, but encouraged by the reassurance. He had this relaxed smile, the type that made you feel like you were part of a private joke. "I can take that as a compliment," I said dryly. "It is," he grinned. "You're Emma, right? From marketing?" I nodded. He introduced himself at that point, and we spent the next half hour exchanging small talk about the conference, our colleagues, and which breakout sessions we could afford to skip. Chris was charming in a not heavy way. He didn't force it much. He just existed. He made me laugh, which I hadn't done very much lately, and it felt good. After that conference, Chris and I began seeing each other more regularly. He'd come by my desk pretending to look for a marketing report and lean on my cubicle wall like he owned the place. His tone was always joking but never crass. He was walking a fine line, I allowed. "You work too hard," he joked one day. "Ever take a break?" "Not often enough," I said, hanging on a smile. "We should get coffee sometime, for team building." It was harmless, just coffee. At least that's what I kept telling myself. So I said yes, as you may imagine. But coffee was not just coffee, and we crossed the line. We began holding these little coffee meetings every other week, then every week. He was always fun to be around, quick with a joke or a story, and he listened when I complained about work, about my life, about John. So I started feeling seen again. I started feeling important and special again, and I started feeling just enough. The big change, the turn, took place one evening after work. We crossed every line that night. Chris found me leaving the office late. I was annoyed about yet another dinner John had canceled, this time because of a last-minute business trip. I had reservations at a nice restaurant. I thought it would be a rare time for us to spend together, but work was king again. I was in the parking lot, fumbling for my keys, when Chris caught sight of me and called out, "Hey, you okay?" I laughed bitterly. "Long day, long week, you know how it is?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Come on, let me buy you a drink. You look like you need it." I should have said no, but I didn't. We sat, talking and laughing like old friends at a low-lit bar. Chris had a way of making everything seem easy, uncomplicated. He expressed all the right sentiments, that I deserved better, that someone like me shouldn't feel unseen. "You're amazing, Emma," he said softly, his gaze holding a beat too long. I felt something in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years, a thrill, a spark. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't stop it. After he walked me to my car that night, he kissed me, and I let him. I do regret now about ever, but now it's too late. I cheated on John. It was all my fault. Chris became my escape. Our team-building coffee breaks became clandestine lunches, which turned into stolen hours in hotel rooms. He made me feel desirable, alive, and in control. At that moment, he was everything. He brought back the colors to my life. He made me feel alive again. But everything turned into a nightmare one day when I got a text message. I froze. My heart banged against my ribs as I read the message. My husband's company, John's company, had bought the corporation I worked for. By lunchtime, I was sitting in his office, attempting to keep calm. "John, what's going on?" I demanded. He looked at me with a look I'd never seen on his face, cold, detached. "Business, Em, nothing more." "But why didn't you tell me?" He relaxed back, his mouth forming into what didn't quite constitute a smile. "Because it didn't matter to you." I stared at him. "What do you mean by that?" "It means, Emma, that I know it all." That was when my world crumbled. John knew about the affairs. He knew everything. I don't know how long he had known, but he hadn't confronted me, not until now. Instead, he'd been building, planning, waiting. He pressed an envelope into my hand, his face expressionless. "I filed for divorce last week. You'll find the prenup to be airtight. You entered this marriage laughing at my startup dreams, and now you're leaving with nothing." I couldn't breathe. "John, please." He stood, cutting me off. "It was your choices you made, Emma. I made mine." After he bought the company, restructuring started the acquisition. Departments were reorganized. People were let go. I walked on eggshells every day, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew John would not let me keep my job, not after everything. When the email finally arrived, it was as clinical and unfeeling as I'd anticipated. "Dear Emma, your position has been eliminated effective immediately due to restructuring following the acquisition. No explanation, no farewell, just an end." I sat in that empty office looking at the display, understanding what John had done. He didn't just fire me. He ensured that he was the one who stripped away my job, my independence, everything I thought was mine. And he didn't need to say a word to me. That's why it hurt the most. While I was out there sleeping around, thinking I was in the driver's seat, that John was too busy and incompetent to catch me, he steadily tightened the financial noose around me. Our accounts had always been joint, but John did most of the finance work. He was better at it, and I didn't care to argue. I thought everything was okay. What I didn't know was that throughout the years, he had been redoing everything, the investments, the savings, even the house. By the time the marriage fell apart, all the major assets were in his name. The cars, leased under his business, the house, tied to his private LLC, our savings. Most of it he'd moved to separate business accounts to which I had no access. John had played the long game, preparing for this moment. All I was left with was a bank account in my name that contained just enough money to pay a couple months' rent. When John finally confronted me, he didn't scream or accuse me of my affairs. Instead, he pushed the paperwork across the table, divorce papers that had been prepared long before. The evidence he had collected over the years was extensive and damning. Phone records, hotel receipts, emails, even text messages I thought I had erased. He had it all, and he knew exactly how to deploy it. Armed with that proof, his lawyers put together a case that obliterated me in court. Alimony denied. I was found at fault for the dissolution of the marriage as a result of my infidelity. The house? Gone. John retained sole ownership. Joint assets? Legally his. His lawyers had said they were business-related investments and not part of the marital estate. I was offered a settlement so small that it felt like an insult, just enough to avoid the semblance of cruelty. John made sure of that. He destroyed my career as well. He bought my workplace, which meant he owned the one thing I had left, my job. He didn't immediately fire me. That would have been too easy. Instead, he let me squirm for 1 month. In an industry in which John's company now wielded considerable power, I couldn't find another job. I applied out of state but felt the doors slam in my face. People in our industry knew John and respected him, and I'll never know for certain, but I suspect that he quietly made sure I didn't end up getting hired anywhere meaningful. During the way my reputation got destroyed too. John didn't tell anyone about what I'd done. He didn't need to. People talk. The murmurs began with concern. Did you hear about Emma and John? Until they became louder. Friends we'd shared as a couple stopped reaching out. Invitations disappeared. It wasn't only that John had walked out on me, it was that he'd walked out on me with nothing to protect myself with. I was free to pursue affairs, which became our social circle's unspoken truth. I was the woman who had cheated on the man everyone was now hailing as a self-made success. I was made invisible, dumped, and forgotten, while John's star just kept rising. So what can I say, guys? This was it. My life got destroyed. It happened so fast that I am still shocked and trying to figure out what to do with my life. This was my story. Hope I will not be judged very much. Thank you for reading it. Emma. Update. Hello, everyone. I am Emma, and I am back to give you an update about my story. I have to say, I have been judged a lot, but also I have been reading nice words as well. Well, there is nothing much to update you about. After John and I got divorced, my life got destroyed in a way I never thought was possible. The figure I was left with was pitiful, just enough for a small apartment and to cover basic bills. I had no savings. John had made sure of that. I went through several months burning down my little stash of cash and assuring myself I'd be back in the game in no time. I was wrong. I had no success applying for jobs. I had applied to dozens of companies in the marketing field, but the industry is small, and John's reach was wide. The rumor mill was turning against me. People were talking behind my back about my perceived lack of professionalism, although no one said it to my face. So yeah, I am still jobless. I can't seem to find a new job. Next Monday, I will be doing an interview as a receptionist in a hotel. I hope I can have this job at least. I have to pay for this small apartment away from the city center and also the bills. The next thing to say is I was left alone. Everyone supported John, all of them. Even my parents talked to him more than to me. They are still very angry with me, and I hope that soon they will forgive me. Nights are the worst. Alone in my small apartment, scrolling social media, I see John everywhere, smiling at events, shaking hands with powerful people, standing next to his new girlfriend. My longtime pals are sharing photos of their lives, their families, and their achievements. And I, sitting silently in a sea of takeout that's gone cold, and a dripping faucet I can't afford to fix. There is nothingness when you lose that which makes you human. Regret is always there. I replayed in my head every error I made, every dalliance, every instant I believed I was getting away with something. I thought I was too smart for consequences, too clever to be caught. But John was smarter. The affairs that had once thrilled me now felt hollow. Chris, Rob, the trainer, none of them mattered. They didn't care about me, and I'd lost my life chasing something empty. That makes me see what I had thrown away, the stability, the security, the respect John had given me. He had created something awesome as I sabotaged myself, and now He was flourishing as I sank. If you are wondering, yes, I tried to reconcile with John, but it didn't work. I began with a short line of text. John, can we talk? I just want to apologize. I stared at my phone for hours, hoping for a reply that never arrived. Days turned into weeks. I sent another message, and another. Each was crafted to sound casual, desperate not to sound desperate. I've done a lot of thinking recently. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing well. You deserve all the success you've had. But all I received in return was emptiness, silence. John never returned my texts. The reconciliation never took place. John had moved on. He had rebuilt his life without me, and he was not going to let me back in. I'd betrayed him, misjudged him, cast aside everything we'd made. I was another regret in his rearview mirror. That's what hurts the most, realizing that I was nothing to him in the end. He won. And there I was, alone in my own decisions. So yeah, this was it, guys. This is my messy life. I am still hurt, and I regret everything I have done. I hope someday I will get over it. I am really thankful for the time you spent reading my story. Wishing you all the best, Emma.